The wind was a wild thing that night, howling low across the Red Mesa plains, carrying dust and grit like a living animal searching for prey. Jake Mercer tugged the collar of his worn canvas coat higher, the fabric stiff from years of dust storms and hard riding. The moon hung pale above the mesas, half hidden behind drifting clouds, and each gust kicked up trails of red dirt that curled and twisted across the road like ribbons of flame. Some nights the west felt alive. Tonight it felt restless. A lone coyote's cry rose from the dry gulch behind Jake, sharp and mournful. Another answered farther off. The sound echoed across the open land, bouncing off canyon walls. Jake didn't mind the noise, he preferred it over silence. Silence reminded him too much of the house after his parents passed. Quiet halls, empty dinner tables, no laughter drifting from the porch. Out here on the ranch, the sounds of animals and wind filled the empty spaces in ways people couldn't. Jake nudged his horse, Flint, forward. The animal snorted, ears flicking in irritation as the wind whipped through his mane. "Easy, boy," Jake murmured. "Storm will settle soon enough." The lantern strapped to Jake's saddle swayed with the horse's gait, casting swirls of golden light on the dirt road. He'd been checking the north fence line. Coyotes had been bold lately, and now he was heading home to the quiet warmth of the ranch house. Maybe a pot of black coffee if sleep didn't come. But as he crested the rise above Sun Hollow, something flickered in the corner of his eye. A spark, a tremble of orange. Too bright to be lightning, too low to be a star. Jake pulled the reins sharply. Flint stomped uneasy. Another flash, this time clearer. A tongue of flame licking upward from behind a cluster of boulders. Jake's stomach tightened. Fire. Around here, fire didn't just mean danger. It meant someone was out there. He guided Flint off the road, weaving down the narrow path toward the hollow. The wind shifted, carrying a faint scent of burning wood and something else. Something sharp, acrid. As Jake rounded the last bend, the scene hit him like a punch. A wagon, the kind Apache families used to travel the high desert, lay on its side, one wheel shattered, the canopy torn and scattered. A trail of pottery, blankets, and beadwork spilled across the rock. A fallen torch smoldered beside it, flames crawling toward a patch of brittle grass. And beside the ruined wheel, someone moved. Jake slid off the saddle before Flint even stopped. His boots hit the ground hard. There, half hidden under a torn deer-hide cloak, was a young Apache woman. She lay curled against the wagon frame, breathing shallowly. Blood streaked her temple. Her shoulder looked badly cut, dark with dried blood and dirt. Her long black hair, tangled with dust and ash, draped across her face like a veil. Her clothes, traditional buckskin, were ripped from the crash, threads unraveling. She looked fragile, almost ghostly, yet every line of her body carried a wild strength. "Ma'am?" Jake crouched beside her. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered. A faint sound escaped her lips, more breath than voice. Behind him, fire crackled, eating its way toward a tumbleweed. "Damn it," Jake growled. He slipped his arms under the woman's body. She was lighter than he expected, but heat radiated from her skin. Fever or shock, he couldn't tell. As he lifted her, her head fell weakly against his chest, leaving a smear of crimson on his shirt. "It's all right," he whispered, mostly to himself. "I've got you." Jake moved quickly. Flint stayed steady as Jake swung her onto the saddle, holding her upright with his arm. With a sharp kick, he urged the horse forward, away from the blaze. The wind fought them the whole way back to Red Mesa Ranch. Dust stung Jake's eyes and he kept glancing at the woman, hoping for a sign of consciousness. She only swayed, limp, breathing in shallow pulls. Under the flickering moonlight, Jake saw her face clearly for the first time. Strong cheekbones, wind-burnt skin, and an expression that, even unconscious, held something fierce. Whatever trouble she was running from, it hadn't beaten her yet. As the ranch house finally came into view, Jake tightened his grip on the reins. He had no idea that this night, the fire, the wagon, the wounded woman, was the beginning of something far larger than a simple rescue. Jake didn't know that he hadn't just saved a girl. He had saved his own fate. Larka woke to the sharp smell of wood smoke and the soft creaking of old pine boards shifting in the morning cold. Her eyes snapped open. For a breath, she didn't move, only listened. A distant whinny, the rustle of hay, wind pushing against the walls of a small wooden house. Then she bolted upright. Her breath stuttered in her chest as she scanned the room. Rough log walls, a faded quilt beneath her, a lantern on a small table, the faint glow of a dying fire. Nothing looked familiar. Nothing smelled like home. She felt trapped, cornered, like a doe waking to find herself in a hunter's snare. Her hand shot to her clothing, but she wasn't wearing her own buckskin dress. A large flannel shirt, far too big, smelling faintly of smoke and leather, hung loosely over her shoulders. Her fingers dug into the fabric as her pulse thundered in her ears. Her lips parted in horror. Someone had changed her. Her eyes darted around, landing on her deer-hide clothes folded on a chair, torn and stained with dried blood. A bowl of warm water sat beside them, cloths darkened with dirt and red streaks. Her breath trembled. Footsteps approached. The door pushed open, and Jake Mercer stepped inside with a mug of steaming coffee in hand. His boots thudded gently against the wooden floor, his hat pulled low, shadowing part of his face. He didn't look threatening, rugged, tired, weather-worn, but to Larka's panicked mind, he was every danger the desert had warned her about. Her fingers twitched. He froze when he saw her sitting up. "You're awake," he said softly, voice low and calm. "Easy now. You're safe." Safe, the word snapped something in her. In one swift motion, she reached under the quilt, yanked the small bone-handled knife strapped to her calf, and sprang from the bed. Before Jake could react, the tip of the blade pressed against the hollow of his throat. Jake didn't lift a hand to defend himself. He didn't even flinch. He simply set the mug down slowly on the table, palms open at his sides. "All right," he said quietly. "If you're going to cut me, let me at least explain why you're here." "You touched me," Larka hissed, voice shaking with fury and fear. "You changed my clothes. I stopped your bleeding," Jake answered, steady as stone. "Your shoulder was torn open. You would have died before sunrise if I hadn't cleaned it." Her jaw clenched, the knife trembled. "My clothes!" "They were soaked," he said. "Blood, mud, smoke. I wasn't about to let you freeze to death in them." He swallowed carefully, the blade dimpling his skin. "I didn't look where I didn't have to," he added in a quiet, earnest tone. "I gave you the shirt because it was clean. That's all." Silence stretched tight between them. Dangerous, fragile. Larka's breathing slowed. Her gaze scanned his eyes, searching for deceit, for anything that hinted at the cruelty she'd known from white men who walked too close to Apache land. But she found none, only a tired steadiness, like a man used to storms both inside and out. Her grip loosened. The knife lowered, just an inch. Jake exhaled but didn't step back. "Listen," he said gently. "I can step outside. Give you space. Give you time. I ain't keeping you here." He backed away slowly, hands still raised slightly, not surrendering but promising no harm. Then he opened the door. Cold morning air swept in as he walked out into the yard without another word. Larka remained frozen for a long moment, the knife still in her hand, chest heaving. The house felt too quiet, too honest, too far from the lies she expected. She moved to the window, lifting the curtain edge with 2 fingers. Outside, Jake walked across the yard toward a corral. A wild, dust-coated Mustang snorted and stomped inside the pen, tossing its mane like a storm trapped in flesh. Instead of ropes or whips, Jake approached with calm steps and soft murmurs. He held out his hand, patient, gentle, letting the horse come to him on its own terms. He didn't force. He didn't demand. The Mustang's ears twitched. Slowly, hesitantly, it edged closer. Larka's eyes widened. There was a softness in the way Jake moved, a steadiness not born of dominance but respect, a tenderness she had not expected from a stranger, least of all a white rancher. Her fingers loosened around the knife's handle. For the first time since waking, her heartbeat eased. And in that brief moment, watching him with the wild horse, something inside her, something coiled tight by fear and betrayal, shifted, just barely. A crack in the wall she'd spent years building. By late morning, the sun beat down on Red Mesa Ranch with its usual dry, merciless heat. Dust shimmered above the barren ground, and the distant mesas glowed a deep rust red under the sky. Jake had just finished splitting kindling when the sound of horses drifted toward him. 3 sets of hooves, steady and deliberate. These men were coming with purpose. Jake straightened, wiping sweat from his brow as 3 horsemen crested the ridge and approached the yard in a slow, intimidating line. They looked every bit the part of bounty hunters. Long dusters flapping in the wind, hats pulled low, bandoliers strapped tight across their chests. Each carried a Winchester rifle slung with casual ease, the kind of ease only killers and men paid to find people possessed. The tallest of the trio, a man with a scar carved across his jaw, reined in his horse and fixed Jake with a stare as cutting as broken glass. "Mornin'," he drawled. Jake didn't move. "You boys lost," the scarred man smirked. "Not hardly. We're looking for someone." His fingers tapped the polished stock of his Winchester. "Word is, an Apache girl slipped past our trail up near Sun Hollow." Jake's jaw tightened, but he kept his face carved from stone. "Haven't seen anyone but my horses." The second bounty hunter, shorter, wiry, eyes like a rattlesnake, spat tobacco juice onto the dirt. "Funny thing," he said. "Tracks near that busted wagon led this direction." He nodded toward the barn. "And we aim to check every ranch within 10 miles. The air thickened instantly. Flint pawed nervously at the ground inside the corral. A hot, heavy quiet settled. One wrong twitch, and lead would start flying. Jake planted his boots firmly in the dirt. "I don't take kindly to strangers snooping around my land." The scarred man chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Relax, rancher. We ain't here to take your livestock." He leaned forward in his saddle. "We're here for what the girl took." Jake's heartbeat kicked up a notch. He kept his tone flat. "What's that supposed to mean?" The man's grin faded. "She's carrying something that don't belong to her kind." His voice dropped low, menacing. "And if you're hiding her," he tapped the rifle barrel against his boot, "that makes you part of her problem." Behind the house, hidden by the weathered boards of the back door, Larka stiffened. She had woken early, still sore but strong enough to limp to the kitchen. She'd planned to thank Jake, or at least apologize for almost gutting him. But the moment she heard strange voices, she froze and listened. And now every word slammed into her like a blow. "They found me already!" Her hand gripped the doorknob, knuckles white, but she didn't move. She couldn't risk stepping out. Not when Jake was standing between her and men who'd burn whole villages to get what they wanted. Outside, Jake folded his arms. "Told you already," he said. "Ain't seen anyone." The scarred man studied him long enough that even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then, a smile flickered across his face, thin as a paper cut. "We'll be back," he said. "And next time we won't be asking so polite." He snapped the reins. The horses wheeled sharply, kicking up dust, and the three riders thundered away across the plain. Only when the hoofbeats faded did Jake let out the breath he'd been holding. He rubbed the back of his neck, muttering, "Damn trouble just keeps finding me." A floorboard creaked behind him. Jake turned just as Larka stepped out from the shadows of the doorway, her hair loose over her shoulders, eyes dark with fear. And something else. Something like guilt. "You heard all that," he said quietly. She nodded. Jake waited, giving her space. Finally, her voice slipped out, soft, pained. "They're not bounty hunters. They're enforcers for the men trying to take Sun Peak land. Men who already hurt my father." Jake's chest tightened. "So you were running?" Larka looked at him, eyes raw. "I didn't want to bring danger here. I never meant to drag anyone into this." He opened his mouth to reassure her, but she shook her head and stepped back inside before he could speak. That evening, after tending to the horses and checking the locks twice, Jake collapsed onto his bed, worn down by the day's tension. The desert night crept in, cool and deceptively peaceful. Coyotes sang in the distance. Jake drifted into a hard, exhausted sleep. He didn't hear the quiet footsteps. He didn't see Larka pause in the doorway, watching him with a mix of sorrow and resolve. And he didn't feel the whisper of air when the front door closed softly behind her. Larka was gone, running again, because she'd rather face the desert alone than let her presence bring death to the only man who'd shown her kindness. Dawn crept over Red Mesa in slow, pale strokes, the sky turning from ash gray to a tired gold. Jake Mercer pushed open his front door, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. The cool morning breeze hit him first. The silence hit him second. The blanket on the couch was folded neatly. The cup she had used last night was gone from the table, and the small knife she always kept strapped to her calf, gone too. Jake exhaled a long, heavy breath. She's gone. Part of him expected it. A girl that wild, hurt, hunted, carrying secrets she wouldn't speak, wasn't the type to stay anywhere long. He'd told himself she had every right to leave. She didn't owe him anything. But damned if that thought sat well with him. Still, he didn't chase immediately. Jake wasn't the kind of man who stepped into someone's freedom without invitation. So he walked to the barn, saddled Flint, and tried working through the morning chores. But a feeling crawled under his skin, wrong, uneasy, the kind that made a man look over his shoulder. By mid-morning, something tugged hard at him. He couldn't shake it. He saddled up Flint again, grabbed his canteen, and rode toward Sun Hollow, the direction she'd likely take if she meant to disappear into Apache land. The ground was calm at first, scattered with faint prints. But then he saw it, a smear of dried blood on a rock. Small but unmistakable. Jake's gut clenched. Damn it, Larka! He pressed Flint harder. The wind was shifting, carrying grit. Dark clouds gathered low over the ridge like a warning. The first threads of sand danced along the trail. A storm was building. Within minutes, the wind howled through the canyons, flinging sand in vicious spirals. Visibility dropped fast. Dust blasted Jake's face and stung his eyes. The world became a blur of red and gold. He cupped a hand over his mouth, leaned low over Flint's neck. Come on, boy, she's out here somewhere. A flash of movement caught his eye. A shape crumpled near the base of a sheer rock wall. He pulled Flint to a halt and leapt off. It was her. Larka lay curled in on herself, hair whipping wildly in the wind, skin coated in a thin layer of red dust. Her breathing was shallow, uneven. Her lips were cracked. Her legs were scraped from the rocky trail. Jake dropped to his knees beside her. Larka, can you hear me? Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused. Jake, she whispered, voice nearly lost in the storm's roar. I've got you, he said, sliding an arm under her shoulders. Hold on. She sagged against him, too weak to argue. He lifted her onto Flint's back and climbed up behind her, holding her steady against his chest while the storm raged around them. The wind screamed like a living thing. Sand lashed their faces. Flint stumbled but pushed through, guided by Jake's steady hand. By the time they reached the ranch house, the sky was a swirling, furious red. Jake carried her inside and laid her gently on the bed. She tried to sit up, but the effort sent her coughing. No, Jake said firmly. You rest. Talk when you can breathe. But Larka shook her head, eyes glistening with a desperate, weary truth. It's time you know why they chase me. Jake knelt beside her, patient, steady. She swallowed hard. My father, he was forced to sign papers he could not read. The men you saw, those hunters, they work for a land baron in Silver Butte. He wants Sun Peak territory. All of it. Jake's jaw tightened. Larka continued, voice trembling. My father didn't understand. They tricked him, and when he refused to sign more, they beat him. I took the real documents, proof the land is ours, proof they lied. Her breath hitched. They'll kill anyone to get it back. Jake looked at her for a long moment. Dust from the storm still clung to her hair and lashes, making her seem almost fragile. Yet her spirit burned fierce beneath it all. Jake, she whispered, when I'm healed, let me go. Don't risk your life for me. Jake stood slowly, wiping grit from his cheek. His voice was low, steady as a mountain. If you want to leave, you can leave. I won't chain a wild heart. He stepped closer, meeting her eyes. But I'm not handing you over to men who'd shoot you in the back. Not today, not ever. Something in her face softened, like the first crack of thaw in winter ice. Outside, the storm roared on. Inside, a different storm settled into silence. The days that followed were the quietest Jake Mercer had known in years. After the sandstorm, after the fear and the fire, peace settled over Red Mesa Ranch like a soft blanket laid across weary shoulders. Larka recovered slowly, but her spirit mended faster than her wounds. By the second morning, she insisted on helping with chores, despite Jake trying to shoo her back inside. She only answered with a firm, unmistakable Apache glare. Jake knew better than to argue. Soon, a rhythm formed between them. Larka worked beside Jake along the long stretch of wooden fence that bordered the east pasture. She moved with surprising strength, lifting planks, hammering nails, tightening wire. Her hair, braided with bits of turquoise and feathers, caught the sunlight as she worked, giving her an almost mythical glow. She laughed softly when Jake cursed at a stubborn post. You swing too hard, she teased. Not everything listens to brute force. And you know better, he grumbled. She simply tapped the post with the butt of her hammer. It slid perfectly into place. Jake stared, she smirked. And for the first time in a long time, Jake found himself smiling without realizing it. In the afternoons, she fed the horses, brushing their coats with gentle, circular strokes. She whispered to them in her language, an ancient tongue that rolled like wind through canyon stone. Even the most skittish mare leaned into her touch. And sometimes, when the sun dipped low, she cooked small rounds of sweet corn cakes on a griddle over the outdoor fire. The smell drifted across the yard, warm, earthy, comforting. Jake found he liked coming home to that smell. One evening, Jake brought Larka to the corral where a young chestnut stallion paced nervously. "He ain't fond of ropes," Jake said. "But you don't need one." Larka raised an eyebrow. "No rope? Then how do you lead him?" Jake stepped beside Flint, his palm resting near the horse's cheek. "With your breath," Jake said, "with calm, with patience. Horses feel what you feel." He inhaled slowly. Flint followed the motion, lowering his head. Larka watched, fascinated. Jake stepped back. "Your turn." When Larka approached the chestnut, the stallion snorted and pawed the ground. But she closed her eyes, breathed deep and slow, like the wind over the mesas. The horse stilled. Then he took one step toward her, and another. Jake's breath caught. She was a natural. Larka opened her eyes and looked back at Jake, her expression a mixture of quiet pride and surprise. He felt heat rise unexpectedly in his chest. At night, they sat by the campfire outside the barn, something Jake hadn't done since he was a boy. Larka fed the flames with cedar wood, its sweet smoke curling upward. The stars above looked close enough to touch. She sang old Apache melodies, notes as soft as dusk, as haunting as canyon echoes. Songs of ancestors, of battles lost and won, of spirits riding the wind. Jake listened like a man hearing music for the first time. When she told stories of her people, how they read the sky, how they honored the land, how each life was part of the earth's long memory, Jake felt something shift inside him, like a piece of his own soul waking up. "You hear the land," he said quietly one night. "I've never learned how." She looked at him through the firelight. "Anyone can hear it, if they stop long enough." He wasn't sure she meant the earth at all. It happened 2 days later, late in the afternoon. One of the mares stumbled in the pasture, and Jake found a broken arrow lodged shallowly in her leg, a stray leftover from old hunting grounds. He knelt to remove it carefully. Larka came beside him, steadying the horse with a soft whisper. When Jake's grip faltered, her hand closed over his, warm, sure, grounding him. He looked up. Her face was close. Her eyes, dark, deep, unguarded, held something he hadn't seen before. Something fragile, something brave. Neither of them spoke, but something passed between them in that still moment. Out in the open air, with dust swirling softly and the world strangely hushed, a connection, a quiet, undeniable pull. And when she finally let go, Jake felt the absence like a sudden cold. That night, as he lay in bed staring at the wooden beams above, Jake admitted something to himself. Something he hadn't let form into words until now. He was afraid. Not of the bounty hunters, not of the land thieves, not even of the trouble Larka was carrying on her shoulders. He was afraid of losing her, afraid in a way he hadn't been since he was a boy. And the fear told him one thing, clear as a gunshot echoing across the plains. Somewhere between the fences and the firelight, he had begun to care. The moon hung full and bright above Red Mesa Ranch, casting silver light over the land. The night should have been peaceful, one of those rare evenings when the desert rested, when even the coyotes quieted and the wind softened to a whisper. But Jake Mercer felt something wrong in the air long before he heard the horses. A heavy stillness, a prickle down his spine, the sense that the land itself was holding its breath. He stepped onto the porch, one hand resting on the colt at his hip. The boards creaked beneath his boots as he scanned the horizon. The moon lit up the open fields like daylight washed in blue. Then he saw them. 3 riders approaching from the east, slow, purposeful, shadows on horseback, armed to the teeth. The bounty hunters. Jake's jaw clenched. He stepped off the porch and planted his boots firmly in the dirt, shoulders squared. The riders drew closer, their horses snorting clouds into the cold air. This time they carried more than rifles. Coiled rope hung from their saddles. Iron shackles glinted at their belts. These men weren't here to ask questions. They were here to take someone. The leader, the scarred man, tugged his reins. "Well, rancher," he said with a cruel smirk, "we figured you'd be too stubborn to tell the truth the first time." Jake didn't blink. "Ain't nobody here for you to take." "That's so," the scarred man drawled. "We'll see about that." He gestured with 2 fingers. The other men began to dismount. The air tightened instantly, thick, suffocating. The moment felt like standing in the center of a lightning storm, waiting for the first strike. Jake rested his hand on his gun, thumb brushing the hammer. One wrong move from anyone, and the yard would explode into gunfire. "You boys take one step closer to my house," Jake said, voice low and steady. "And you won't take another." The scarred man lifted an eyebrow. "You're outnumbered." "Maybe," Jake answered, "but I'm fast." A tense silence dropped over them. Even the horses shifted uneasily. Then, quiet as a snake in the grass, footsteps padded behind the house. One hunter peeled away, circling toward the back like a wolf looking for an opening. He never reached the corner. A sudden hiss split the night, followed by a sharp thunk. The man cried out, stumbling backward, clutching his shoulder where an arrow, short, carved, Apache-made, jutted out. Larka. From the shadows behind the barn, she emerged with a wooden bow in hand, breath steady, eyes dark and fierce. "Back away," she warned. The hunters spun toward her. Jake seized the distraction. He drew his Colt and fired into the dirt at their feet. "Move again," Jake growled, "and the next one ain't warning." The scarred man cursed loudly. "You two just signed your damn death papers." Jake grabbed Larka's arm. "We're leaving now." They sprinted behind the house as bullets began tearing through the porch posts. Jake threw open the gate behind the corral. Larka darted through first. Jake followed, slamming it shut as horses shrieked in panic. They fled across the open field, the ranch shrinking behind them. Dust kicked up around their boots, and gunshots echoed against the distant cliffs. The forest of tall pines loomed ahead like a black wall. Jake and Larka dove into it, weaving through the trees, ducking low branches, hearts pounding. The hunters' shouts faded as the forest swallowed them whole. The night grew darker, cooler. The wind rustled through thick needles above. Jake led Larka toward a narrow crack in the stone, a place he'd hidden as a boy while exploring the hills behind the ranch. "Here," he whispered, guiding her into the narrow crevice between two boulders. They squeezed inside, the space barely large enough for two people. Jake braced one hand against the rock, breath heavy. Larka huddled close beside him, her shoulder brushing his chest. Outside, the night slowly went quiet. The hunters' footsteps faded. The forest settled into stillness again. For the first time since fleeing the ranch, they could breathe. Larka's hands trembled, not from fear, but from exhaustion and the weight of everything crashing down around them. Jake reached out without thinking, covering her hand with his own. She didn't pull away. In the small darkness, between cold stone and colder night air, their fingers intertwined, hesitant, unsure, but real. The silence around them felt different now, warmer somehow, as if the world outside had paused to give them this brief, fragile moment. Jake met her eyes in the dim light. "We'll get through this," he whispered. And though she didn't speak, the way she held his hand told him she believed him. Or wanted to. Either way, Jake felt something settle deep inside him. Something solid, something dangerous, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. He wasn't just fighting to protect her anymore. He was terrified of losing her. The night in the pine forest stretched long and cold, but Jake and Larka didn't move from their hiding place until the first hint of dawn touched the treetops. By then, the danger had drifted off into the desert, leaving only silence and the earthy scent of wet bark. When they finally stepped out of the narrow stone crevice, Larka looked pale and exhausted. Jake guided her to a fallen log, letting her catch her breath. The rising sun cast a warm glow across her face, softening her guarded expression, but her eyes still held a storm. Jake crouched in front of her. "You should rest a minute. We'll head back when—" "No." Her voice was quiet but firm. "There's something you need to know. Something I should have told you sooner." Jake's brow furrowed as he settled beside her. Larka took a long, shaky breath, as if preparing to lift a weight she'd carried alone for far too long. She reached under her shirt and pulled out a small deerskin pouch tied with a braided cord. When she loosened the knot and unfolded the flap, Jake glimpsed edges of old parchment, yellowed, cracked, hand-drawn. "This," she whispered, "is what they're after." Jake stared. "A map?" "Not just a map," she said, eyes fixed on the parchment like it was both treasure and curse. "It's the original land record of Sun Peak, proof that long before any white surveyor set foot here, my people lived on the Red Mesa and the valleys around it." Her fingers trembled as she held the fragile document. Jake touched the dirt with his thumb, thinking, "The hunters—" "They're not hunters," she said bitterly. "They work for Whitlock Land Company. They pretend to negotiate, but they steal, they forge, they lie. Jake's jaw clenched. He knew the name. Everyone in the territory knew the company. They were swallowing ranches and towns whole under the guise of development. Larka swallowed hard, her voice tightening. They came to Sun Peak with contracts full of lies. My father refused to sign. He told them the land was sacred, that our people were here long before their papers. Her breath hitched. They dragged him out of our home, beat him until he couldn't stand. They said the land was already theirs, already recorded, but their documents were forged. She held up the old map. This is the proof. Jake felt a heavy, sickening weight settle in his chest. Your father, is he? He lives, she said, but her voice cracked. Barely, and they'll go after him again if they find out I escaped with this. Jake looked at her, really looked, at the strength she carried with trembling hands, at the pain etched into her eyes, at the sheer will it took to run into the desert alone with armed men chasing her. You've been carrying this all by yourself, he murmured. She laughed, not out of amusement, but exhaustion. What choice did I have? The last time I trusted someone who wasn't Apache, they sold our hunting routes for whiskey and coins. I learned the cost of believing in the wrong people. She hugged the map to her chest, shoulders trembling. I've been running for so long, Jake. Running from men who see me as a tool, or a nuisance, or a body to be silenced. I don't know who to trust. I barely trust myself. Her voice broke completely. And when I look at you, she shook her head. It scares me, because I don't know if you're the one man who might stand beside me, or just another who'll turn his back when it matters. Jake felt something inside him twist. He hated hearing those words, hated the pain behind them. Slowly he reached out, not grabbing, not demanding, just offering his hand, palm open. Larka, he said softly, look at me. After a moment of hesitation, she did. Jake held her gaze steady and unwavering. Not all of us are cut from the same cloth. Some men hurt, some men steal, some men lie. He swallowed, voice thickening with something raw. But that's not who I am, and that's not who I'll ever be to you. A breeze whispered through the pines. Larka blinked fast, her lashes wet. If you'll let me, Jake continued, I'll stand on your side, against Whitlock, against those bastards on horseback, against this whole damn territory if I have to. Her breath trembled, and for the first time since he'd met her, a tear slid down her cheek. Silent, unguarded, devastating. Jake reached up gently and brushed it away with his thumb, letting his hand linger near her jaw. She leaned into the touch. Not much, not fully, but enough to break the hardened shell she'd lived behind. Jake, she whispered, and in that fragile second, as dawn spilled gold across the pines, as the truth finally lay between them with all its weight and pain, something deep shifted in the space they shared. She was no longer alone. Red Mesa Ranch had faced storms, droughts, and wolves, but nothing like the dust cloud rising from the south that morning. Jake saw it first from the ridge behind the barn, a dark, boiling mass rolling across the plains like a swarm. Riders, dozens of them. The Whitlock hunters had returned, no longer pretending to be bounty men. Now they came as a small army, armed, angry, and determined. Jake sprinted down the hill. Larka, grab your bow, we're under attack. Before she could answer, the first flames leapt into the dry grass along the fence line. A lantern had been thrown. The fire snapped and roared, racing across the pasture with brutal speed. Flint screamed from the corral as bullets cracked through the morning air. Jake cursed under his breath, grabbing his Winchester from the porch. They're trying to smoke us out. Larka stepped forward beside him, eyes sharp as obsidian. Then we don't run. Another volley of gunfire tore into the porch beams, showering splinters. Jake yanked her behind the old wagon sitting half sunken in the dirt. The wood was rotted, but it gave them just enough cover to breathe. The world exploded around them, lead whistling past their ears, the ground shaking with the thunder of hooves, smoke billowing from burning grass. Jake peeked around the wagon, fired 2 quick shots, and ducked back as bullets slammed into the wheel inches from his face. They're circling to flank us, Jake shouted. I see them, Larka answered, already stringing an arrow. One rider broke off from the group, aiming to slip behind the barn. Before Jake could warn her, Larka moved with the swiftness of a desert hawk. She sprinted across the yard, scaled the slanted side of the chicken coop, and vaulted onto the barn roof with breathtaking agility. Jake stared, half terrified, half in awe. From the roof's edge, her silhouette rose against the burning sky. Wind whipped her braid behind her as she drew her bow. Steady, fierce, unshakable. She released. The arrow struck the rider's chest, knocking him clean off his horse. The hunters roared in outrage, firing wildly at the roof. "Larka, get down from there," Jake shouted. But she didn't listen. She moved along the roof beam with sure-footed balance, loosing arrow after arrow, like a storm bird defending its nest. A bullet ricocheted off the metal gutter beside her. Jake's heart lurched. "She's gonna get herself killed," he muttered, firing again to cover her. Then everything went wrong at once. A hidden shooter emerged near the haystacks, rifle trained directly on Jake's chest. Jake swung his Winchester up, but too late. The man fired. Jake braced for the impact, but it never came. Instead, Larka's cry tore through the yard. He spun around just in time to see her tumble from the barn roof, an arrow still clutched in her hand. A bullet had grazed her side. Bloody, brutal, too close to fatal. "Larka!" He dropped his gun and ran to her, sliding on his knees across the dirt. He pulled her into his arms, hands trembling as he pressed against the wound. "You idiot, why'd you do that?" His voice cracked, raw and desperate. She winced, breath shallow. "He was aiming for you." Blood seeped through his fingers, warm and slick. Something icy wrapped around Jake's heart, squeezing tight. He had lost people before. Parents, friends, neighbors taken by sickness, gunfights, the cruelty of the desert. He knew loss like most men knew prayer. But this, the thought of losing her, it terrified him in a way he didn't understand until that moment. Gunfire still thundered around them. Flames crept closer. But all Jake could see was Larka's face, pale, determined, still trying to lift her bow even though her arms shook. "Don't move," he whispered. "I've got you. I swear I've got you." With his free hand, he grabbed his revolver and fired blindly into the pasture, forcing the hunters back. Larka, despite the pain, raised her bow one last time. Their attacks fell in rhythm, man and woman fighting side by side through smoke and chaos. Eventually, the hunters began to retreat, pulling their dead and wounded. The fight wasn't over, but this round belonged to Jake and Larka. As the last rider disappeared over the ridge, Jake gathered her closer, breath shaking with the weight of everything he'd almost lost. Her head rested weakly against his shoulder. "Jake, we have to keep moving." He held her tighter. "No," he whispered fiercely. "I'm not losing you. Not today. Not ever." And in the firelit dust of Red Mesa, he knew with crushing certainty he could face 100 hunters, but he couldn't face a world without her. By the time the smoke finally thinned over Red Mesa Ranch, the sun was sinking behind the ridgeline, turning the world a deep copper red. The bodies of the hunters had been hauled off, the wounded tended by the sheriff's men, and the flames beaten down to charred patches of black earth. Jake stood with dust on his face, ash on his clothes, and fear still clawing at his chest. But the danger had passed. Larka, wrapped in a blanket and sitting on a crate near the corral, watched the sheriff unroll the old fragile map on the hood of his wagon. Sheriff Camden was a stern man, with a gray mustache and a voice that usually sounded like gravel being dragged across steel. But today he spoke gently, with a respect most lawmen rarely bothered to show toward her people. "Well," the sheriff muttered, tapping the parchment, "this here's older than any deed I've seen filed in Silver Butte, and the signatures match the earliest territorial records." He shot a glare at the men shackled in the back of his wagon, Whitlock's hired guns who'd survived the fight. "Looks like the Whitlock Company has some explaining to do." Jake stiffened. "You'll charge them?" "Oh, I'll do more than charge them," Camden said. "Forgery, land fraud, attempted murder. They won't be stealing any land anytime soon. Sun Peak will get justice." Larka closed her eyes, shoulders sagging in relief. It wasn't complete victory, not yet, but after months of running, hiding, bleeding, it was the first moment she had felt the world shift back toward truth. When the sheriff and his men finally rode off toward Silver Butte, carrying the map as evidence and the prisoners in chains, Red Mesa Ranch fell quiet. The evening wind drifted through the burned grass, carrying the scents of smoke and desert sage. A tired peace settled over everything. Jake walked toward Larka slowly, as though afraid she might disappear if he moved too fast. "You all right?" he asked, voice low. She looked up at him. "I should be, but I'm not sure what comes next." Jake swallowed. "Whatever you choose comes next is up to you." Larka stood, wincing slightly at the lingering pain in her ribs, but strong enough now to hold herself tall. Her eyes turned toward the distant mesas glowing orange beneath the sunset. Her homeland, her people. "They'll expect me to come home," she murmured. "The tribe will need someone to speak for them when the hearing begins. My father, he needs me too." Jake nodded, even though each word felt like a nail driven into him. "Makes sense," he said softly. "They're your people." She stepped closer. "But this place..." She looked around the ranch, at the barn roof where she'd fought like a hawk, at the fence she'd helped fix, at the fields where she'd learned Jake's quiet ways with horses. "This place has become something to me, too." Jake forced himself to breathe. "You don't owe me anything, Larka." She turned to him fully then, the wind lifting strands of her dark hair across her cheek. Something vulnerable flickered in her expression. "Jake," she whispered, "I need to ask you something, and I need the truth." His heart slammed against his ribs. "Ask," she swallowed, voice trembling despite her strength. If I chose this place instead of going back with them, would there be a place for me here?" Jake froze, not because he didn't know the answer, but because the truth of it scared him more than any bullet he'd taken today. He stepped closer, slowly, carefully, until she could hear the unsteady break in his breath. "The ranch," he said, voice low, rough, vulnerable, "is big, real big." He paused, then added, almost in a whisper, "But my heart, Larka, it's bigger, and it's already yours if you want it." Her breath caught, and her eyes glistened, shimmering like starlight reflected off a hidden spring. For a moment, neither of them moved. The world around them didn't matter. The burned fields, the bloodied ground, the ghosts of the battle. Only the silence between them, soft, warm, full. Then Larka stepped into him, resting her forehead against his chest. Jake's arms closed around her instinctively, protectively, reverently, like he was afraid to hold her too tight, afraid she might break, afraid she might vanish. "I don't know what tomorrow brings," she whispered, "but I know. I don't want to face it without you." Jake lowered his chin to her hair, breathing in the scent of smoke, cedar, and something beautifully hers. "Then don't," he murmured. The wind swept gently across the ranch, wrapping them both in the soft, golden hush of evening, as if Red Mesa itself approved. Two souls, one vow, spoken in silence. And somewhere deep inside, Jake knew. This was the moment everything changed. Seasons shifted quietly over Red Mesa Ranch, the way they always had, slow, stubborn, timeless. But something in the land changed all the same. Not in the soil or the sky, but in the small human world Jake and Larka built together. The scars from the battle healed, leaving only blackened patches of dirt where fire once raged. Jake rebuilt the fences, stronger than before, layer by layer, board by board. The work was hard, but for the first time in years, he didn't do it alone. Larka rose with the dawn each morning, barefoot in the cool sand, tending to the small garden she had carved out beside the house. She planted sage, bitterroot, and mountain mint, her people's healing herbs. As the weeks passed, green shoots pushed through the red earth, stubborn and alive, as if the land itself welcomed her home. Jake would pause in his work just to watch her move among the plants, gently touching each leaf like greeting old friends. Sometimes she caught him staring and shook her head with quiet amusement. "You work less when I'm near," she teased. "Maybe," he'd reply, "but the view's worth it." He built her a small wooden arbor beside the garden. She, in turn, taught him which herbs soothed burns and which cured fevers. Their lives blended in ways simple and effortless. In late summer, Jake began constructing a new horse stall beside the barn. Larger, sturdier, made from thick pine beams hauled all the way from the mountain pass. Larka helped drive the nails, laughing each time she bent one sideways. "You've a talent for fighting," Jake joked, "but you sure can hammer." She nudged his shoulder with her own. "Maybe I don't need to. I have you." And sometimes after the day's work, they'd sit on the porch steps as dusk settled over the valley. Larka would hum soft Apache melodies, and Jake, who never had much voice for singing, would listen with his hat low and his heart open. Everything between them grew the same way the garden grew, quietly, steadily, with deep roots. When word finally came from the sheriff that Whitlock Land Company had been stripped of its false deeds and fined heavily, Larka made a trip back to Sun Peak to see her father. Jake offered to ride with her, but she squeezed his hand and said, "This I must face alone, but I will return." And she did. 2 weeks later, she rode back through the ranch gate on a bay mare Jake had given her. When he stepped outside, she dismounted and simply said, "My father is healing. The tribe knows the truth. And they told me, my path is my own." She looked at Jake as though seeing him for the first time all over again. "I choose here." Jake didn't speak. He couldn't, not for a moment. But he reached for her hands, holding them as though anchoring something precious and fragile. Life settled into a gentle rhythm after that. Not easy, but shared. Evenings were filled with desert winds and soft laughter. Mornings smelled of sage and coffee. Nights brought stories by firelight, some of hers, some of his. And so it was on a late autumn evening, when the sky burned orange and gold, that they found themselves standing on the hill above the ranch, a place where the land stretched wide like a promise. Below them, the horses galloped across the open field, their manes catching the dying light. A gust of wind swept through the tall grass, lifting Larka's hair and carrying it like a dark ribbon behind her. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing the familiar scent of dust, smoke, and the faint sweetness of her herb garden. Jake stepped beside her, boots crunching softly on the dry earth. "You think the land remembers?" she asked quietly. "I reckon it does," he said. "It remembers what we fight for." She turned toward him, and he reached for her hand, not to keep her from running, not to claim her, but simply to walk beside her. They watched the sun sink behind the mesa, casting long shadows across the valley that had once been the center of a war, and was now the heart of their home. Jake squeezed her hand gently. "Whatever comes next," he said, "we face it together." Larka leaned her head against his shoulder, a soft peace settling over her. For the first time in her life, she felt like she stood on ground that welcomed her. Not as a wanderer, not as a survivor, but as someone who belonged. And as the last sliver of sunlight slipped behind the red cliffs, the truth settled around them like a warm evening wind. In the wild American West, where the earth runs red and the wind carries the voices of old souls, they found what both believed lost long ago: a place to belong, a person to come home to,